Is there a more iconic horror game franchise? I feel like out of every major one, it's the only one that not only managed to break into the mainstream, but actually stay there to this day. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you about the many ups and downs of the mainline games, since that's been discussed to death. But to be honest, despite finding 8 to be a resounding disappointment, I can't help but be excited for Requiem. And I'll admit that that's due in part to its strong connections to the Outbreak games. Maybe it's because my first game in the series was one of them, but I've always loved how experimental and unique the side games and subseries spawned from Resident Evil are, because more often than not, they end up spawning at least one great game. Sure, Dino Crisis 1 is terrible, but 2 rocks. Devil May Cry speaks for itself, and I adore every mainline Onimusha game. Side note, god, I am so fed up with modern series revivals just throwing out everything that made the original stand out in favor of chasing trends. Thanks for nothing, Capcom. In any case, there was always one sub-series that stood out to me, because it's one that everyone seems to know exists, then immediately writes off because, well, let's be honest, the first one is extremely infamous. Of course I'm talking about Gun Survivor, and yet I genuinely believe that this series deserves more credit than it gets, for one game in particular. But before we get into that, because of the nature of light gun games, this video will contain several flashes of white covering the screen. I've also set the games to show a reticle via emulation in order to make it easier to tell where I'm currently aiming when using the light gun. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I think it'd be a good idea to just get right into it.
Resident Evil Survivor.
Alright, you really don't need me to repeat why Resident Evil Survivor is terrible. It's been discussed to death already, but I guess we might as well go through it a bit just for the sake of completion. Resident Evil was never known for its particularly intricate stories. That's always been another series domain, and it usually plays out the same every time. Welcome to Umbrella Corporation. We make zombies, I think. The virus breaks out, and it fucks shit up. Usually it's the protagonist's job to just get out of there alive. This game is no different, and it still has the same corny English dialogue and dub that made the first game so iconic. The only real standout part is that they decided to rely on everyone's favorite plot device, amnesia. I see a lot of people riffing on this game's story in particular because yes, the dialogue is hilariously bad and it practically makes no sense at all, but also this is the same series that gave us
Wesker, you're pitiful.
So it really wasn't as bad as people make it out to be. No, the real problem is literally everything else. I mean shit, where do I even begin? Might as well rip off the band-aid and start with the controls. Way before RE7 was ever even conceived, this was the first ever first-person Resident Evil game. And honestly, the actual control scheme itself isn't terrible for a console FPS at the time. You move your character like a car and can only go forwards or backwards and steer into a direction. Instead of giving you a fixed reticle on screen at all times, you instead have to hold down a button to pull up your sights and aim like in a rail shooter. To make it easier, you can also just auto-aim at enemies and spam the shot. Once you run out of ammo, you automatically reload. That's it, that's the entire gameplay loop. It is dreadfully dull, and even the weapon variety doesn't help because of your 7-weapon arsenal. 4 of them are just different kinds of handguns, of which C is objectively the best, so you never have any reason to not use it. The level design, while still an interconnected map, is as basic as you can get, and there is no need to actually bother trying to aim properly as your handgun has infinite ammo. And even if it didn't, the enemies are so unengaging, it might as well. But hey, maybe that's just on me. Maybe the game's just coming across as boring because it wasn't designed with a controller in mind. See, one of the most commonly cited complaints with this game is that the American version completely removes light gun support. So these controls were all you're left with. But since the game was clearly designed with the light gun in mind, surely it must be better when using it, right? Ladies and gentlemen, I am happy to announce that the light gun support somehow makes the game worse. This is the Namco GunCon, the de facto light gun for the PS1. It has a trigger and 2 buttons on the 2 sides of the muzzle. The game does not support hybrid play with light gun and controller, so you're stuck with just the gun. And let me run you through the absurd control scheme that they came up with. To walk forwards, you shoot off screen, and to go backwards, you do this twice quickly. But let's say you want to run instead. To do that, you need to shoot once off screen, wait a second, and then fire again. Do it too quickly, and you'll just go backwards. Too slowly, and you'll just continue on at normal speed. If you want to turn, you have to press either one of the 2 side buttons that rotate you left or right. Double tapping either locks you onto the nearest interactable thing. And if you want to open the menu, you press both simultaneously. This control scheme is genuinely atrocious, and somehow I've seen people both defend and praise it. And now I really have to ask the people who do that, are you a fucking crab? Be honest with me. The only actual beneficial difference to the regular controls is that you can react to enemies instantly, since you don't need to enter an aiming mode first. You just point and shoot. And as if all of that wasn't enough, for some reason in either mode, the moment you land a shot on an enemy, the camera hard snaps to them, which is fine on controller thanks to the auto lock on, but can be absurdly disorienting with a light gun. What doesn't doesn't help is that, in my experience at least, the light gun keeps desyncing all the time. I've never had this kind of issue at all in games like Time Crisis, but it made an otherwise boring game sometimes become infuriating. And really that sums up the entire experience. It is dreadfully dull, and what few ideas it does have are outweighed by just how uninterestingly they are executed. But there's one more thing that I really think exemplifies just why this game is so hated. Let's say you want to take a break from the game, turn your console off for the night and call it a day. Well, unfortunately, you can't do that. The only way to save is by dying and choosing not to continue. Small issue, doing this only saves your inventory. You're gonna have to start the actual game progress back from scratch. To be fair, the game is only an hour or two long, but this is such a baffling design decision that I think it serves as a perfect microcosm of just what's wrong with this game. Funnily enough, it did get a PC port, but it was exclusive to China, and I haven't played it. Though honestly, I doubt even normal FPS controls could save this game from being extremely boring. In February 2001, barely a year after the first Survivor game, Capcom announced that they had already been well underway having Namco develop an all-new arcade game. It was supposed to be based on Resident Evil and called Firezone. 2 months later, it came out as Gun Survivor 2 Biohazard Code Veronica, or Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica in the West. It's a sequel to Gun Survivor, which has absolutely nothing to do with it, barring its name, a first-person perspective, and a less than stellar reception. It's also a very loose adaptation of the already terrible Code Veronica. What could possibly go wrong? I don't own an arcade machine, so I'm going to be talking specifically about the PS2 version of the game. Since this game was designed from the ground up as an arcade title, it's a lot faster paced in nature. Enemies actually swarm you now. Instead of a big interconnected map, you now have smaller individual stages. There's a time limit on your ass at all times, and you now have a much wider variety of weapons. But in exchange, you can only carry your basic infinite ammo pistol and a secondary weapon at any time. Run out of ammo and the secondary is done for. There's actually 2 separate modes for this game. The first is arcade mode. This one is, as far as I can tell, the same as the arcade version. You play as either Claire or Steve and have to find all the keys in a level to unlock a door aptly labeled "Leave here because it is dangerous" before fighting a boss. The stages are loosely based on Rockford Island from Code Veronica, but are pretty much nothing more than a series of really small rooms you pass between. Small issue though, every single one of them has a loading screen door animation attached to it when you enter and leave. This is fine when you have a big open area and hallways, and you're playing a slow-paced survival horror game. But when you're in a fast-paced arcade shooter and the rooms are this small, it very quickly adds up to getting extremely annoying. If the timer somehow runs out, then you don't immediately die, but rather it would be extremely painful, because here comes Nemesis. Wait, cut, hold on a minute. What the fuck is Nemesis doing here? He wasn't even in Code Veronica, I triple-checked that. I would love to know what decision led to him being here. It's not like Code Veronica doesn't have its own chases they could have used, but whatever, I guess. There is a secret file in the game that you can unlock by finding all of these hidden gems in the stages that explain that he's like a replica or something, but who gives a shit. He chases you down for the rest of the stage, and if he catches you, it's instant death. But for some reason, if he kills your AI partner, he just despawns. I don't know if he ever comes back either, because seriously, you'd almost have to try to actually get hit by him. He's nothing like he was in RE3. He's slow and barely does anything at all. The timer might as well not exist unless you're gunning for score. And since we're already on the topic of your partner, holy shit, Steve might just be worse than he was in TV proper. And the same goes for Claire too, when you play as him. They just stand around looking mildly annoyed and do nothing at all while getting hit. This is exactly why people cheered at your death, you stupid piece of shit. And since we're already talking about Steve, god, I'm killing it with the transitions today. The way the story unfolds in this game is really weird, and I don't mean how they just quote-unquote adapt Code Veronica, but in that every cutscene is fully unvoiced. The characters talk, their lips move, but not a single sound escapes them. It's extremely uncanny. That's about it for the arcade mode. The other one, Dungeon, is as far as I can tell PS2 exclusive and functions kind of like a survival score attack mode thing. You don't have a partner in this, and thank god, because now they can't obstruct your view for no fucking reason. Instead, you just go around killing as many enemies as you can, racking up multipliers, and going all the way down a clock tower until you kill a boss. There's nothing else really to it. It's just kinda there. And now that we've addressed the whys and whats, let's talk about the elephant in the room. How does this game actually play? For the most part, it's better than the first for sure. Again, let's start with the gamepad. Your gun is actually visible on screen like in a traditional shooter, and you can use the left stick, but not the D-pad for some reason, to walk around. But if you want to move the camera, you're still stuck with the shoulder buttons, because of course you are. Why wouldn't you be? The right stick? Totally pointless. What makes this weirder is that you can't aim up or down either, and the crosshair is permanently locked to the middle of the screen, so it's pretty much impossible to land headshots at all. And on that note, I think that's exactly why they don't seem to matter. Every now and then I did land what the game deemed critical hits, but despite aiming at the heads at every opportunity, that didn't seem to trigger them most of the time. One more thing to note is that this game isn't even entirely first person either. It does this really weird thing where it sometimes takes you out of the POV when in corners or grabbed by enemies, and it can be pretty disorienting. The light gun controls meanwhile are also very different from the first game, this time using a hybrid system of the gamepad in one hand and the gun in the other, which is already a massive improvement. The gun itself is not visible and your aim is completely free, though like I said earlier that doesn't really matter much, and the weird POV shifting happens here as well. For some reason this setup uses the D-pad to walk, but you can't use the stick. I guess they thought it would be too cumbersome considering the stick would be considerably more distant on the PS2 controller, but I really don't see a reason to have it disabled outright. Alas, the more things change, the more they stay the same, so you still awkwardly turn the camera with the A and B buttons. Double tapping gives you a full turn now though, so that's nice. The PS2's GunCon 2 also has an additional button C, but that one's only used to swap between your gun's manual and automatic modes. You only ever need to shoot off screen to swap weapons or pick up items, and best of all, the light gun never desyncs. If I shoot at the same spot, it's actually gonna hit there. So overall, these controls are mostly perfectly fine. A bit jank, but otherwise fine. It's just that the game they're designed for isn't. I'm sure if you play this in an arcade, you could have a fine enough time, but when alternatives like House of the Dead exist, why would you go for a game where the main timer doesn't matter because you'll finish a level with plenty to spare even if you set it to short, where running out essentially means nothing even if you do, where exploration is entirely superfluous barring for score, where your best weapon is the one you start with, where your partner is more of a hindrance than the actual enemies, and where the levels are tiny rooms with 2 load screens between them that last longer than you'll actually spend inside of them. Or to put it more succinctly, this game fucking sucks, because it spends its entire runtime being either really boring or infuriating, and neither of those two are things that I would usually refer to as a worthwhile time investment. I think at this point it's pretty clear that this series is really dumb, but somehow it keeps getting dumber. Get ready for a brief history lesson, okay? See, not a single one of the Gun Survivor games was actually developed by Capcom themselves. Resident Evil Survivor was made by Tosei, who primarily did contract work and helped out developing other people's games. In case you're wondering if they have even a single original IP of value to their name, then the closest thing they have is Storefy. And as mentioned before, the second game was made by Namco, and had absolutely nothing to do with Gun Survivor until a last-minute name change. For this game, the series, for some reason, went back to Tosei, and it's honestly impossible to tell what the plans for it were at this point, considering that Gun Survivor 3 isn't even a Resident Evil spin-off anymore, but a Dino Crisis one, to the point where it doesn't even have the Survivor title internationally, being instead called Dino Stalker. And just to make this whole mess even more confusing, the fourth game was somewhat directly handled by Namco again, but I'll explain all of that in detail when we get there. So, Dino Stalker, huh? Well, since we're back in the console-only territory, they actually put a bit more work into the story again, and it's really stupid, even for Dino Crisis standards. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-Dino Crisis. Sure, I will admit that I think that 1 and 3 are absolutely terrible games, but 2 rocks, and I much prefer the action direction that the series took on with that game. But that doesn't mean that I'm just going to sit there and nod when you give me a story about a World War II fighter pilot being randomly transported there. Well, maybe I wouldn't be so harsh on it if I could actually hear what's being said. Maybe I missed some settings in the options, but I couldn't find any subtitle options, and that's kind of a problem when the audio mixing is bad enough to make Sonic Adventure 2 sound listenable.
That sound?
As for the game itself, first things first, how are the controls? With a light gun, honestly not too bad. You still walk with the D-pad, not the stick, but this time you actually turn with it as well, with the A and B buttons being relegated to strafing. To reload, you again shoot off screen, but you still can't manually look up or down, which makes this the third game in a row with a really jarring problem that would have been really easy to fix. But I digress. This game actually uses a very similar weapon system to the second, with a default gun with infinite ammo you've got equipped at all times, and a large arsenal of secondary weapons you can pick up, some of which also have infinite ammo. You can swap between either at will with the C button, and use a scope mode by pressing A and B simultaneously to zoom in, though this one is pretty much entirely useless. On the gamepad on the other hand, Jesus fucking Christ, it doesn't even matter how good or bad anything is because of one singular flaw that shatters the entire experience. The sensitivity is all over the place. You can use either the stick or the pad to move around. If you use the latter, everything's really slow and it makes turning to get the dinos a giant chore. But if you use the stick instead, it's so sensitive that it starts shooting around like crazy. I made some friends try this, and some of them straight up ended up experiencing motion sickness. Pair this with the fact that you once again have full free aim, this time by using the right stick, and it makes this hands down the worst of these games to play with a controller. But let's say you're playing this with a light gun. How's the game itself? Gone are the arcadey gauntlets from 2, or the interconnected map from 1. Instead, we still have a level structure which varies between either linear rail shooter stages, where you shoot enemies in a circular area around you, and large open stages, where you follow the directions on your minimap until you find the goal and fight a boss. The former are perfectly fine and actually quite enjoyable. Sure, it's no Time Crisis, and no small part thanks to the chore that is slowly moving your side around, but they get the job done. The ladder though? Oh my lord, what a mess. These stages are massive, and despite seeming like there'd be a lot to explore, are actually quite empty. And the reason for that is simple. Every stage runs on a timer like in 2, but if it runs out here, you instantly die. You can recharge it by shooting these weird time crystal things in every stage, but go off the beaten path and explore too much and you'll quickly waste a lot and get nothing in return other than a higher score and kill count, leading to a death by timeout because your walking speed is extremely slow. Why was the first game the only one with a run function? This also makes avoiding enemy attacks really annoying. So to compensate, the game bombards you with health items. Dino Stalker feels like it was this close to being a genuinely really fun game. The shooting is fun and responsive. The dinos actually engage you unlike the zombies in the first 2 games. The weapon variety is fun. I especially like how the revolver is really strong but has insane knockback. And the story is so ridiculous it loops around to being super funny, even if for all the wrong reasons. But because of this game's insistence on open areas and freeform movement like in the first 2 games, combined with the worst gamepad controls in the series yet, it just falls short of being good. But thankfully, the Survivor series has one last game to turn everything around. Gun Survivor 4 Heroes Never Die, or Resident Evil Dead Aim, is completely and unironically one of my favorite games in the series, or at the very least a top 3 contender. As I mentioned before, this game was indirectly developed by Namco, or rather, some of its staff. See, around 2000, several Namco staff came together and founded their own studio named Cavia. This was the kind of studio that would make or help out on just about any game you'd asked of them, then randomly put out something original as well, all with very mixed results. Ghost in the Shell on the PS2? Great. Beat Down Fists of Vengeance? Not so great. Unfortunately, they are nowadays mostly known as the studio that took a background audits for Time Crisis 2 and allowed them to become one of the worst game directors of our time. Dead Aim was one of their first projects as a studio. The story is shockingly still canon to the main RE continuity, and actually so was the first Gun Survivor game, though unlike it, the events of Dead Aim were, as far as I know, never acknowledged in any mainline entry. It's worth noting though that both of its protagonists were playable characters in Namco x Capcom, which was really fun to see, and since I already brought it up, let's talk about said story, because it is honestly pretty fun. Umbrella scientist and bioterrorist Morpheus D. Duval has hijacked the Umbrella-owned cruiser Spencer Rain and intends on launching missiles containing the T-virus. He uses this as blackmail against both the US and Chinese governments, who each respectively send out special agents Bruce McGivern and Fong Ling to stop him. These 3 are the only characters in the game, and the dynamic between Bruce and Fong is really enjoyable because they keep being forced into situations of unwilling cooperation, where Fong repeatedly tries to screw Bruce over. She's really silly, and actually became one of my favorite characters in the series because of that. You frequently swap between the 2 throughout the game, with Bruce making up the crux of the game in terms of combat and exploration, and Fong taking over during shorter set-piece sections. After beating the game though, you can play New Game Plus, which reverses those roles, letting you play as Fong for most of the game with every weapon unlocked from the start, though the cutscenes and story remain entirely unchanged. And you know what? Set cutscenes are amazing. They are legitimately hilarious. If you thought RE1 was cheesy, then you ain't seen nothing yet. Half the dialogue and the subtitles doesn't even remotely match up to what they're actually saying, and even when they do, the performance is truly breathtaking.
I'll distract the monster while you run after Morpheus.
Got it.
Alright, monster. It's payback time.
The way the characters move is genuinely incredible. Bruce looks like he's suffering from scoliosis half the time he takes aim, and I can't even begin to describe what this scene looks like without getting demonetized.
I'd let the Chinese lady molest me if I was not.
It's the perfect kind of earnest B-movie cheesiness that the first 2 games lacked, and Dino Stalker leaned into way too hard to the point of parody. Gameplay-wise, we're back to a proper RE structure like in the first game. You've got a big interconnected map, lots of documents full of lore to read up on, and all the time in the world. We even have save rooms with their own save music this time. But there is one big difference. The exploration now takes place from the 3rd person, only entering 1st person during combat, which I guess is kind of like the reticle mode when playing Survivor 1 with the gamepad. Most of the game takes place on the Spencer Rain itself, and it's honestly really well designed. Every room and every hallway is recognizable enough to where you'll easily remember where you are, and since the game is significantly more arcadey and shorter than the average RE game, the map is also pretty small, which makes navigating it pretty intuitive. It makes up most of the game and is generally a very enjoyable map to explore. Then about 80% in, you reach the final 2 sections of the game, which are little more than a series of long, repetitive hallways. It's a damn shame that they couldn't carry the otherwise great map design all the way until the end. Unfortunately, the maps in this game do universally have one big issue. Just like in the last 3 games, there are absolutely no puzzles. I didn't really miss it in the other 3 because they're just so structurally different. Well, aside from 1 I guess, but I think I'd rather die of bullet poisoning than sit through puzzles in that game. Here though, it feels like a part of the experience is missing. But if there's one part of RE that works really well in this game, it's the Stalker type enemy. Partway into the game, Morpheus says eugenics, injects the syringe that creates mass from nothing, loses his dick, grows a pair of tits, and then turns into this game's main tyrant enemy. Twice in the game, he'll start hunting you down like Nemesis, doing flips and flick flacks and dive kicking you to close the gap like he's Wesker in the Anderson movies. And since you can dodge attacks by pressing L1 at the right time, it actually makes these segments pretty engaging. It almost makes me wish that there were more of them. Now, you might be a bit confused as to why I've been praising this game so much, considering it generally follows the Gun Survivor trend of being universally hated. Well, the answer leads us back to the core problem plaguing this entire subseries from the start: the controls. When using just a gamepad while in third-person mode, they're fine. Everything works like you'd expect it to, with all actions actually being able to be done entirely with the left side of your controller. You can also double tap back in order to do a quick turn. But the moment you enter first-person view to aim, throw this thing right out the window, because this might just be the second worst game in the series to play with a controller, right behind Dino Stalker. The aiming reticle you control with the right stick is way too finicky, and because of how quickly the enemies move towards you in this game, getting headshots is borderline impossible, and you really need to get headshots in, because that is the only way to take an enemy down permanently. In particular, hitting the top of their head will cause them to be shot halfway across the hall, counting as an insta-kill. Later on, if you don't land this on an enemy, they'll just get up again after a bit, and trying to deal with that on a controller is an exercise in pure frustration. But what if you didn't use a controller? Of course, the gun con is once again available, and it plays in some way, I guess. I have no idea because I never used it. No, the real star of this show is the one that most people don't even know about. Plug literally any generic USB mouse into your PS2 and watch as this game jumps from one of the worst games in the series to one of the best. All of your non-combat actions are still entirely doable with the controller. Dodging, quick turning, moving and interacting all still work the same. But once you get into the aiming mode, you have complete, perfect control. And since you can control these third-person sections entirely with the left side of your controller, holding it in your left hand and having the right one constantly on the mouse works like a charm. You just left click to enter aim mode and then left click again to shoot. Right clicking reloads your gun, and if you want to exit first person mode, you just press any button on your controller. You still can't aim up or down manually, but because of the third person movement and the total control you have over everything regarding that, it never becomes a problem unlike the first 3 games. And I can't even begin to understate how fun it is to headshot a zombie and watch it fly halfway across the screen, or having a hunter lunge at you only to shoot them right out of the sky, just in time to take a shot at another enemy and then juggle the two of them. The feedback on your guns is excellent. This game has, in my opinion, the most satisfying combat in the franchise. And don't get me wrong, shooting enemies is really fun in RE4, and it can be pretty good in other games as well, but it doesn't even come close to the immediate gratification that is blowing a zombie into a crowd and watching them fall over like bowling pins. But if you use a controller and can't aim properly, you're completely denied of its joys. And that right there is this game's ultimate sin. And with that, I have said all I wanted to about the Gun Survivor series. While I really can't stand the first 2, I actually did quite enjoy my time with Dino Stalker when it was all said and done, and I think it's pretty clear that I really like that aim. It's a shame that we never got a Survivor 5 on the Wii, because I do think that that would have been the perfect platform to continue the series on. Well, I guess we did get the Chronicles games on there instead, but those are traditional rail shooters retelling the events of the main games. I actually remember having a pretty good time with them back in the day. Umbrella Chronicles was actually the first RE game I ever beat, though admittedly I haven't replayed them since, so maybe my opinions would have changed since then. Either way, I would have loved to see what they could have done with this series there. But hey, for what it's worth, Fong and Bruce are still immortalized in the Cross Zone trilogy, and with RE9 using a mix of both first and third person gameplay, it feels like at least a bit of Survivor's identity seems to have lived on. Whether or not that's for the better or worse, that's still to be seen, but I'm sure it can't be worse than the remake of 3. With all of that said, if you enjoyed the video, then I would really appreciate a like, a comment and a subscription. And if you're American, a hype as well. Apparently that is a thing, but YouTube won't tell me about it because I'm European, so I'm relying on you guys. I wish you all a wonderful morning, day, evening, or night. I'm gonna go take some mixed herbs. Cheers. You know, I'm actually surprised I managed to make a whole video on Resident Evil and only mentioned Wesker once. Well, fuck, I guess I mentioned him twice now. God damn it.
Before anything, the Asian girl in that donut shop was sexy as fuck. Right? Something about an older Asian. I would have fucked the daylights out of that Chinese lady. If I could fuck that Chinese lady, my life would be fucked. Fucking that Chinese lady is. I can't fuck that Chinese woman. I almost fucked that Chinese lady on the. Yes, I would fuck that Chinese woman.